It's time to tear into these precons and see what we can make of them. Today it's the Virtue and Valor precon from the Wilds of Eldraine, featuring a commander that makes auras for us. So let's take a look and see what we can do with this deck. Now, my goal with these precon teardowns of the Eldraine decks is to make them be as Eldraine centric as I can be. So we're going to be kicking some cards out that may sound questionable when we do it, but in this case, I think it makes the deck feel more cohesive towards my goal of theme for the deck rather than just being the most powerful deck you can build. So to start with, let's take a look at the commander, and that is Elevir of the Wild Court for 2 and a green white. Get a human knight that when it enters the battlefield or attacks, create a virtuous roll token attached to another creature you control. And it says, whenever an enchanted creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Now, this is quite a powerful commander. Virtuous roll tokens do not exist in the main set, but they are essentially a token copy of Ethereal Armor without the first strike part. So it gives a +1/+1 for each enchantment that you control. But if you've been playing other enchantments prior to bringing this into play, you could easily have a pretty burly creature when this thing comes down. And the built in card draw with those enchanted creatures, as long as they connect, is just a nice treat to go with the deck. First and foremost, I know I sung the praises of Generous Gift as a good reprint in Commander Masters, but unless you're having issues with like a specific land in your play group, you're not likely going to need to be able to hit a land with this. And what I'm replacing it with is a more thematic spell that's coming in Wilds of Eldraine. More on that later. Then we have Sylvan Ranger. Now, I understand why they have this in the deck. They want a creature that can get you a land and can be enchanted later, but I'm not big on green creatures that do this kind of thing, but doesn't actually put the land straight into play. And again, we're going to swap this with something better, and we'll discuss that in just a bit. Now we have a group of cards that kind of fall under the same umbrella reason why I'm removing them, and that is Tithe Taker, Careful Cultivation, Pollen Bright Wings, Jukai Naturalist, Starfield Mystic, and Core Spirit Dancer. They all have something that kind of spoils the Eldraine flavor of the deck I'm angling for. You're not going to find an Orzhov Tax Collector in Eldraine, or you're not going to find monks or saprolings or even core. They're just not part of that world. So, regardless of the Omen Path storyline, I'm kind of push these things out of the deck so they feel like they fit Eldraine better. And just like the last grouping, this next group of cards coming out is all on flavor grounds, and that's Daneth the Capuchin Paragon, Siona, Captain of the Pyleas, Shalai, Voice of Plenty, Ajani's Chosen, Rishkar's Expertise, Winds of Wrath, Hall of Heliod's Generosity, Krosan Verge, and Vito Gazi, the City Tree. Now, all of these have proper names of characters or locations that are found on other worlds, and I don't want that for this version of the deck. They're good cards in the deck, but the flavor is the whole point of what I'm doing with this upgrade set. So what am I adding to replace these things? Well, let's start with that Generous Gift I removed. We're going to replace that with Stroke of Midnight. Now, unless your group is running lands that absolutely need to be gotten rid of, like a Field of the Dead, Stroke of Midnight is just a simply better removal spell that fits the theme of the deck. You're not going to give them a 3/3, you're going to give them a 1/1. It's just a much better deal for you. So we're going to go ahead and do this flavor swap and get a better card out of it. Same deal with the Sylvan Ranger we removed. Let's go ahead and replace that with Wood Elves. Now, rather than just going to your hand, we're going to get that land into play, with the only downside being that it can only get a forest land. But we're going to slot in some dual type lands to give this more targets to hit. Next is one of the cards from the new Court Cycle, Court of Ardenvale. The Sun Titan that comes with this deck is going to get a new friend here, and it's going to make us the Monarch at the same time. But this also gives us a second version of the Titan's trigger, and when most of the auras and stuff in the deck are already 3 or less anyhow, this is going to have lots of targets for us to either recast or bring them straight into play out of your graveyard as long as you're the Monarch. Next is one I recommended for the Ariete deck video I did last week, Archon of the Wild Rose. And it's even better in this deck because we're focusing more on the auras that go on our own creatures rather than trying to put stuff on your opponent's creatures to make them attack each other. So many of the creatures in this deck are already like, 1 to 2 power to start. So this is going to automatically give a 2 or 3 power boost to a lot of stuff before even the auras that are on them are factored in. So this is almost a must play in this deck. Then we have another one I recommended before, Return Triumphant. It gets a good amount of our creatures back from the grave that have died, and it makes another aura for us to work with, so it's just a good thing to have in the deck as well. Another copied recommendation from the Ariat deck that was just really good, and it's really good here too, is Spellbook Vendor. It's just a constant source of auras as long as you can pay the one for the trigger, making it a good choice for the deck since it cares all about the auras going under your creatures. So we can just keep spreading out those roll tokens, and as long as they don't have another roll token attached to them, we can make them into sorcerer rolls and just keep on going. Next up is a new common from the main set, Slumbering Keepguard. Now, the base version of this deck includes enchantments that give +1/+1 or +2/+2 for each enchantment you control. The Keepguard essentially has that built in as long as you pay 2 and a white for every time you want to boost it up. The bonus here, though, is that it gets +1/+1 for each time you pay in, as it snapshots the enchantment count as it resolves. Just remember that it won't get an additional power and toughness modifier if you activate it and then play more enchantments. And that's because the way the ability is worded, it's you pay in and you get it. It's not that he gains the ability of +1/+1. It's you pay in and it's a big burst all at once. Next is a card I could have included in the Ariat deck, but I left it out because we were more about enchanting the opponent's creatures than our own creatures. Well, this one cares about auras on our own creatures, and it's going to make them bigger with a tail for the ages. Are there better anthem effects? Yes, but most of them only give +1/+1 or key to like a certain creature type that you have to name. For this deck, it's just really good because it's on the theme of our enchanting our creatures and making them bigger and bigger. So this gets the nod here. Then we're going to have the replacement I have for Winds of Wrath from the Precon. Now, Winds of Wrath is a very good card in this deck, but Wrath is actually part of a plane that's on Dominaria that was overlaid onto the plane, and I don't want it here in this deck. So instead, we're going to get into the Wilds of Eldraine set and grab Expel the Interlopers and put that in there to give us an additional board wipe that we can adjust accordingly to the power of our creatures. And then we can go ahead and wipe out anything that's either bigger, or we can just name 0 and nuke everything off the board, and then it's just a plain 5 mana board wipe. We also have a removal spell that's basically only good in a deck like this, Graceful Takedown. We're going to lean hard into the aura themes of the deck, and we're going to go ahead and run this. So then it'll basically kill anything that's not indestructible or untargetable, because all the damage that you're going to be doing off your enchanted creatures should be able to kill just about anything when you set this off. We're also going to add a creature that could feasibly be the commander of this deck in Yenna Redtooth Regent. Now, one of the ways of breaking a game of commander is bending the rules so that you can have virtually multiple copies of any card in the deck. And Yenna's going to give us copies of any enchantment we don't already have copied. And the super synergy bonus of this thing is if she copies an aura, which the deck is mostly comprised of that, she's going to untap and scry for 2. And then as long as you have 2 more mana laying around, you can copy a different enchantment on the board and do it again and again until you run out of mana. Then we're also going to look at a reprint that's coming in the Enchanted Tales part of Wilds of Eldraine, Season of Growth. Since they gave us this great Eldraine themed art, I had to slot it here. And it's a very good card to begin with. And then for us, it's going to net us a card every time we cast an aura on one of our creatures and scry as we cast our other creatures into the game. So it's going to give us a nice blend of card selection and draw in a nice, inexpensive package. The last couple upgrades are going to dip into the original Throne of Eldraine set, starting with All That Glitters. There was no way I wasn't going to play one of the best auras in all of Magic, let alone the one that actually came from the original Eldraine set in this deck. So it just fits in so well, and it's going to pump our creatures up bigger and bigger and bigger the more enchantments and auras that we have on the battlefield. And speaking of all these auras, we're going to also use Sir Farron the Henge Hammer. He's last, but he is certainly not least in this deck because we're going to go ahead and bring him in here. You can enchant him up, and the bigger that he gets, he's going to attack and pump up a second creature that's coming into the red zone against your opponents. So you're going to have 2 massive creatures able to start punching every time he swings, and he just gets better with every aura you can stack up on top of him. That said, if you don't care about the flavor of the deck like I did for most of these upgrades, this is what I would recommend doing. Leave the cuts in that I put in there for having specific characters from other planes because they're all really good cards that deal with enchantments and auras. And then I'd also add in 2 cards that came from the Aftermath set. Danitha New Benalia's Light and Calyx Guided by Fate. This version of Danitha allows you to cast an aura out of the grave once a turn, and then that way you can keep stacking your auras back up if a creature dies or whatever. And then the version of Calyx here, it allows us to put counters on our creatures every time you put an enchantment into play with Constellation, so it also triggers off the roll tokens that are created, and it also allows you to have the enchanted creatures when they make contact with your opponent to copy an enchantment. So then you can start copying some of your other stuff and spreading your auras around, making multiples out. The only thing I would say here is just remember that Calyx is a little bit of a non-bo with Yenna, since her ability only works if you don't already have a copy of something. So if you're gonna run Calyx, I probably wouldn't run Yenna, and vice versa. If you're running Yenna, I probably would not run Calyx. So that's what I have today for you guys. What did you guys think? I really enjoyed trying to figure out how to make this thing just ooze that Eldraine flavor. And I want to go ahead and put this one together and see what you guys thought. If you have any comments, suggestions below, let me hear them down below. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.